always starts with silence, not the peaceful kind, not the kind that lets your thoughts rest. This one hums, it buzzes just beneath your skin. It's the silence of people who stop talking the moment you walk into a room. Of women who grip their rosaries tighter, of children told not to stare, of the chapel bell that rings louder when you're near, as if trying to drown out something in you. You were born in that village. A place so old even the trees seemed to pray. The streets were narrow, worn thin by barefoot pilgrims and the ashes of old prayers. Your house was near the edge, past the mill, where the wind carried the scent of wood smoke and stories no one told out loud. You were just a girl, quiet, curious, a little odd perhaps. You liked to watch the moon instead of sleep. You asked too many questions. You read books no one else touched, the ones with Latin margins and faded saints on their covers. The nuns at school said you had a restless spirit. Your mother said you had your grandmother's eyes, and that was not meant as comfort. No one talked about your grandmother anymore. Then came the whispers. They didn't start with screams or exorcisms. They began like all ancient fears do, in the soft, coiled language of gossip. A candle flickered too fast when you passed. The neighbor's cat hissed at you once. A storm hit on the night of your 13th birthday, and Father Raphael fell from the steeple ladder. You weren't there, but you were blamed anyway. Someone said you smiled too much at the graveyard. Someone else said they heard you talking in your sleep, in tongues no one taught you. You didn't remember dreaming. But when you asked them what you had said, they just crossed themselves and walked away. In a village ruled by faith, reason doesn't matter, belief does, and they started to believe something was wrong with you. At first, it was just avoidance. They stopped asking you to join the processions, then they stopped meeting your gaze. One morning at chapel, you noticed the priest anointing his hands after giving you the wafer. You hadn't done anything, but you had become something. Something they feared, and the silence deepened, became heavier, denser. You began to wonder if they were right. You didn't tell anyone at first about the dreams. It began subtly, shadows curling at the edge of sleep, dreams that left your bedsheets soaked and your heart pounding. In one you stood barefoot in the nave of the church, staring at a statue of the Virgin Mary. Her eyes wept blood, her lips moved, but no sound came. Only a burning heat behind your own ribs, like something was trying to speak through your lungs. You woke up choking on your breath. The candle beside your bed had gone out, melted into a twisted mess, though you swore it had been fresh. The next night, you dreamt you were standing in the graveyard behind the chapel. Your hands were digging. But not into the ground, into your own chest, pulling at something black and writhing. You didn't cry out, you just smiled. That smile haunted you, because it felt familiar. In daylight, things didn't return to normal. In fact, they got worse. You began to hear your name whispered when no one was around. Not always threatening, sometimes soft, almost loving, like someone was watching over you. But other times, it was different, like a warning or a dare. You tried to ignore it. To act like everything was fine, but your reflection betrayed you. Your eyes in the mirror looked older, hungrier. They lingered too long, watching you after you turned your head. You began avoiding mirrors altogether. And then one morning your mother found the rosary you had always worn snapped in two. The beads scattered across your bedsheets. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. She only looked at you, and for the first time in your life, her gaze held more fear than love. That same day, a boy from the village threw holy water at you in the square. You laughed, not because it was funny, but because something inside you did. And you weren't sure it was you. You stopped going to chapel after that. The priest stopped coming to your house. But the dreams kept coming, more vivid, more seductive. You felt stronger in them, powerful. You could command fire with a word, make the moon dim with a thought. You began to long for sleep. And for the first time, you began to think maybe they were right, maybe you were possessed. But what if it wasn't a curse? What if it was a gift? It wasn't a trial, it wasn't even a knock. It was the creak of the front gate in the dead of morning, the sudden hush of roosters silenced mid-call, the soft clang of metal against metal as they readied the shackles. You saw them through the cracks in your shutters, 3 men in black coats, faces tight with fear dressed up as righteousness, and behind them the priest. His hands trembled as they clutched the crucifix, but his eyes, they didn't. His eyes were steady. Cold, as if he had waited for this moment. Your mother didn't scream when they entered, she didn't plead. She just stood back, holding her apron in shaking hands, like she knew this was a debt long overdue. Your little brother hid behind her skirts, crying. You caught his eyes just once before they dragged you from your room. He didn't look scared, he looked relieved. They said your name aloud, then they said the devil, S. They didn't explain where you were going because they didn't have to. Everyone in the village knew where they took people like you. People who spoke with demons, who laughed at holy water, who woke screaming the names of dead saints and tore pages from prayer books in the market square. You didn't remember doing that, but they said you did, and the worst part, you didn't argue. The ropes weren't tight at first, they didn't need to be. You didn't run, you didn't fight, because deep down a part of you whispered, maybe this is what I am, maybe I was never mine to begin with. As they led you through the village, faces peeked through shutters. Some watched with pity, others with curiosity, but most with quiet satisfaction. As if they had been waiting for this, as if you were the rot they'd always sensed beneath the wood. And in your mind, a voice you no longer called your own whispered, "Let them take us. Let them try to burn out what they can never understand." You didn't weep, but the sky did. They brought you to the edge of the village where the chapel met the woods. Not the main chapel, no. This was older, forgotten. A crumbling stone building that leaned like a secret too ashamed to stand upright. The door groaned open like a sigh held for centuries. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and old incense, the kind of scent that clings to your lungs thick and bitter like regret. There were no candles, no hymns, just a single room. No windows, no bed, no cross. Only stone walls, a wooden stool, and rope burns carved deep into the floorboards where others had likely knelt before you. How many voices had echoed here, begging to be seen, to be saved, to be heard by someone, anyone other than the walls? They unbound your wrists and left without speaking. The door slammed, the lock turned, and then silence. At first you thought the stillness would be the worst part, but it was. The worst part was the whisper you heard, not from behind the door, not from the corners of the room, but from somewhere inside you. A soft voice, amused, gentle, like an old friend brushing hair behind your ear. "They were right," it murmured. "You've always belonged to me." You staggered backward, hit the wall, pressed your hands against your ears. But there was no escaping something that lived beneath your ribs. Maybe it was the isolation, maybe it was the fear. Or maybe, just maybe, belief is contagious. And when enough people believe something about you, you start to believe it too. Days passed, or maybe hours, time lost meaning, light never came. And in that thick, unmoving dark, your own breath became the only rhythm. You began to speak aloud, not to pray, but to answer, the voice, because somehow it always knew what to say, what to remind you of, what to unlock. They returned on the 7th day, or perhaps it was the 3rd, or the 30th. By then you had long stopped counting. You no longer measured time by light, but by the echo of your own breath and the hunger that curled inside your stomach like a sleeping animal. The door opened slowly, not with urgency, not with fear, with certainty. The priest came in first, not the one who baptized you as a baby, nor the one who used to smile as you passed the chapel gates. This one never smiled. His face was carved from stone, lips thin and cruelly quiet. Behind him were two others, hooded, silent, faceless. They didn't greet you. They didn't ask how you were. They simply placed a small wooden stool before you and sat down, as if visiting an old friend. As if you had invited them. Then the priest asked the question you had come to dread more than hunger, more than the darkness itself. What did you do to invite the devil in? At first you shook your head. You mumbled the same words they had heard dozens of times already. That you didn't know, that you didn't do anything, that you were just a child. He didn't strike you, he didn't raise his voice, he just waited, and waited, and waited. Until the silence pressed into your lungs harder than any rope could have, until the stillness inside you began to crack, until the voice, the one that lived in the walls of your mind now, began to answer for you. You began to say things you had never thought before, that you had wished harm upon others, that you had seen strange visions, that sometimes you felt like you could control things when you were angry. Were those things true? Had they ever happened? Or were you simply repeating the stories they had whispered around you like incantations? You saw their eyes widen. They leaned forward. Finally, they said, "Finally, the devil speaks," but it wasn't the devil. It was the sound of a child learning to survive, by telling them exactly what they wanted to hear, even if it meant turning your own memory into ash, even if it meant becoming the thing they feared, just to make them stop. Just to make them leave you alone, but they didn't, they never did. And this was only the beginning. They saw you, every single one of them. When the church cart passed through the square with you locked inside that wooden cage, barefoot, trembling, your wrists bound in prayer rope, their eyes followed. But their mouths stayed shut. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Bakers paused mid-loaf. Shepherds stopped their sheep from wandering too close. No one shouted. No one cried out. No one dared to ask, "Where are they taking the child?" Because they already knew. They knew the church did not come for the wicked. They came for the weak. And weakness in their world was contagious. You caught sight of familiar faces behind shuttered windows, the teacher who once praised your writing, the merchant who used to slip you sweet figs when no one was looking, even your cousin, Tomas, hidden behind his mother's skirts, eyes wide with something between guilt and fear. You wanted to scream. Not for help, not anymore, but for recognition, for someone to at least say your name, to remind the world you were not a curse in the shape of a girl, but you, a person. Someone who once ran barefoot through fields and whispered secrets to the moon, but the silence was deafening. They looked at you like you were already gone, like the church had erased your soul the moment they branded you possessed. The priest said the devil made you dangerous, the villagers said nothing at all, and silence, you would learn, could be sharper than any blade. At night, when you were alone in the stone room again, with only the rats and your own breath to remind you you were still alive, you whispered their names. One by one, the ones who could have spoken, the ones who knew you, truly knew you, the ones who chose to look away. You whispered their names until they no longer sounded like people but spells. Then you stopped whispering altogether. Because that's what silence does. It teaches you how to disappear long before your body ever follows. At first, you told yourself the fear came from them, their eyes, their silence, their whispers behind wooden doors and stone chapels. You believed the terror lived in the sound of their prayers, not in your pulse, but slowly something shifted. The real danger wasn't them, it was you, not because you were violent, not because you ever hurt anyone, but because you started believing them. You began watching yourself from the outside like a shadow looking in. Every small moment became a clue, a cough in the night, a twitch in your sleep, a shiver with no breeze. You memorized them all like a detective building a case against yourself. You stopped trusting mirrors. One night, alone in the candlelight, you sat in front of the cracked glass that hung unevenly on your wall. It had always been there. But tonight it looked different. It didn't reflect you. It studied you. You stared at your reflection, and your reflection didn't smile, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Your eyes watered, but it just kept staring. For one long, unbearable moment, you wondered if the devil they feared had never lived outside of you, but had grown in the space they carved with their fear. You blinked, the mirror didn't. You closed your eyes, the room spun. And in the quiet that followed, something inside you whispered. Maybe they were right all along. You never meant to isolate yourself. At first, you stayed in your room because it was quieter, safer. Out there in the halls of the monastery, the silence was filled with suspicion. Footsteps paused outside your door too long. Conversations always stopped when you entered the room. They said they were praying for you. You started praying for distance, but silence has its own voice, and one night it found yours. It started with a creak, then a breath, no, not a breath, but the memory of one, a sound that shouldn't have been there. You turned your head slowly, the way someone does when they're not sure if they're awake. The candle beside your bed flickered once, and the stone wall beside it whispered, not in words, not at first. It was more like a vibration, a rhythm behind the ear, like something had learned to speak through the cracks in the mortar. A sound like rustling fabric where there was none, like someone was thinking just loud enough for you to feel it. You pressed your hand against the wall. It was cold still, dead stone, but the whisper was warmer, closer, not coming from the outside world but from your mind. Your faith, fractured by fear, had become a bridge. And now something walked across it. You whispered back just once, "Who are you?" No one answered, but that night you slept with your back pressed to the door, not the wall, because now you knew something the others didn't. What they called a curse might not be possession at all. It might be listening. The door had always been a boundary, between you and them, between your doubts and their prayers, between what they believed and what you were starting to hear. But tonight it became something else entirely, not a symbol of safety but of surrender. It creaked open slowly, without a knock, without warning. No footsteps led to it, no voices announced themselves, the handle didn't twist. It just opened, as if the air had decided you no longer deserved privacy, as if your fear had summoned it. You sat up in bed, eyes locked on the black space beyond the threshold. The candle beside you had already died out. You didn't remember when. Shadows leaked in like smoke, thick and heavy, folding into corners, crawling across the floor like they were alive. You waited for a shape, a face, a voice, but nothing entered, nothing had to. Because something had already left, your sense of separation, the feeling that you were still you, whole, independent. What had once been your voice now sounded like many, echoing inside your own skull, not like thoughts but like visitors. Not screams, not curses, just murmurs, always murmurs, the same sentence over and over. You couldn't even remember when it started. You let them name it, and so it became true. Was this possession or something gentler, more dangerous? Because what they didn't tell you, what no sermon had warned you, was how peaceful it could be, to stop resisting, to stop explaining, to stop pretending to be one person. The voices didn't fight you, they cradled you, they hummed you to sleep. You didn't close the door, not anymore. Let them think it was the devil at least listened. They arrived just before dawn, 4 men, 1 woman, the priest, 2 deacons, a nun, and the village doctor, holding a vial of something amber and trembling. They brought incense, a crucifix older than the church. They brought holy words stitched together with fear, and they brought silence, the kind that swallows birdsong and leaves only breath. You were already awake, sitting in the corner, knees tucked. Back straight, not trembling, not smiling either. They didn't greet you. They greeted the thing they thought was inside you. Their eyes scanned your face like it was a locked box with something violent inside. You didn't protest. You just tilted your head slightly, watching them with curiosity, the kind a mirror has for the face in front of it. The priest stepped forward. He raised the crucifix. He began the Latin, and then You laughed not because it was funny, but because you realized something tragic they didn't know. They thought they were casting something out, but the thing they feared, the thing they chanted against, had already become you. It had your voice, your breath, it wept when you wept. It curled up in the dark beside you, whispering comfort when the world offered none. They sprinkled water, you didn't flinch. They recited prayers, you whispered them back, word for word, not in mockery, but in eerie harmony. As if the devil they feared was just someone who remembered the scriptures too well. At one point the nun stepped back, her hands shook. "Who are we talking to?" she asked, voice barely audible. And your reply, gentle, empty, calm, was this: "Whoever you need me to be." Because by now it didn't matter. Possession, madness, trauma, guilt, these were just costumes, layers, masks that fit too well. They had spent so long chasing the demon inside you that they never stopped to wonder what would happen if the demon simply waited. Waited until you were too tired to fight, too lonely to scream, too eager to be seen even by something inhuman. And now they were staring at a girl with hollow eyes and steady breath, speaking in their own tongue, mouthing back their own prayers, but with something else beneath the cadence. A stillness that didn't belong to God.